All right. Keep in mind that this is from May 15th, so might be a little out of date, but mostly what we need is there. Thank you, Abadi Ludlam, for writing this. I agree with a lot of what's in this. I don't ultimately support the call to inaction. I think you should vote for Zohran, but we'll get into it. Zohran Mamdani is a DSA member running as a Democrat for mayor of New York City. He's currently polling second in the primary behind Andrew Cuomo, the ex-governor of New York. Not only is Zohran running as a Democrat, but he is also consciously trying to strengthen that flailing party. As he said in a New York Times interview, if we want to bring these New Yorkers back to the Democratic Party, then we have to show them that we're serious about making their life more affordable. So right off the bat, I do agree here that, he's talking about bringing people back to the Democratic Party, improving the Democratic Party, and we've kind of seen that to be a dead end over the past several years, right? So I'm not against what they're saying here, but I don't know if just not voting, not participating in this case gets us closer to where we want to be. Class independence is essential. To wage an effective struggle against the class enemy, workers need a political party of our own. The Democratic and Republican parties are capitalist institutions which exist to advance the interests of their class, not neutral vessels to be filled with whatever class content we want. This is Lenin. We'll talk about this more in a sec, but I think things were obviously very different in Russia 100 years ago. We might need a slightly different approach, but I think ultimately this class independence point is true. I think this is what we need. They said the Democrats are less popular than ever. There is huge discontent with both capitalist parties and a palpable hunger for an alternative. Now is precisely the time to attack the Democrats and provide a class independent alternative to channel this discontent. So I agree. We need an independent socialist workers' party. But I question whether RCA or anyone else has figured out the best way to build that alternative in our current conditions. Again, I think Lenin's right. I think it's also not Russia 100 years ago right now. So we have to think about what's the best approach to build our socialist party here and now in modern day America. Imagine the political energy that would be unleashed nationwide by a successful independent socialist campaign in the nation's largest and most economically significant city. I can imagine a lot. Instead, Zohran and the liberal socialists are wasting this opportunity, trying instead to direct class anger back into a capitalist party. A genuine socialist campaign would run on a class-independent basis. The goal would not be to win the election at any cost, but above all, to use it as a platform for attacking both parties as enemies of the working class, advocating for the creation of a working class alternative, and explaining the need to organize to overthrow the entire capitalist system. This message would get a huge echo in the current political turmoil. Okay, so now they've kind of explained where they're coming from a little more. I want to say what my idea of what should happen is. And to be clear, I don't think DSA is going to do what I'm about to say. What I think is that Zohran should play the game he's playing currently. He should run the campaign he's running currently, win, and then as mayor, he and the DSA as a whole break away from the Democratic Party, become their own independent standalone party, right? Because we don't have a parliament in the US, so it works a little bit differently. It seems to me, I mean, I've never lived in Canada or Europe or places that have parliaments, but it seems to me it's a little easier to get a little bit of power in a parliament. Maybe not a lot, but you can get through the door a little bit. And that's why, the Bolsheviks were able to do this in the Russian Duma, which was more of a parliamentary system. So again, I think, run the campaign he's running, say what he's got to say, win, and then break away. Because I've wondered why people don't do that in Congress more. People will switch party occasionally. Some people will re-register as independent when they get elected and no longer be associated with the party. But so that's why I think, if you're really going to do like an insurgent thing into Congress or whatever, the squad, if they were a little more left, like if they were actually socialists, then maybe that would be something they could have talked about and coordinated. Let's not only have our progressive caucus and the squad, as it's known, let's fucking get in there and then Sorry, we've just created a three-party Congress. Get fucked. I think that would make so many waves, and then you've got a new party ballot line for people to run on. What the fuck do I know? But this just seems like more realistic than what they're saying here, which is to just be a third-party candidate, make noise, and try to get people to join RCA by running a candidate. It's a little like we've seen it before, The Green Party, again, not really a socialist party. They don't really know how to do this. I don't think they really care to do this. They've gotten nowhere in over 30 years. PSL ran a presidential candidate last year. I thought their campaign was great. They were running on a class independent basis. The goal was not to win the election at any cost, because how's PSL going to win the presidential election? It's not going to happen, right? At least now. But above all, to use it as a platform for attacking both parties as enemies of the working class. They definitely did that. Advocate for the creation of a working class alternative and explain the need to overthrow the entire capitalist system. They did. They didn't do bad for their. I think it's PSL's first presidential campaign. They got tens of thousands of votes. At least their social media game was really good. I think they had at least 100,000 followers on TikTok. They knew how to work this media ecosystem, but I don't think they got very far doing that. Maybe if they do it every 4 years for a while, maybe they would be better at it than the Green Party. Tell me if I'm off base here, because again, I agree. And I'm with Lenin on using the campaigns, using Parliament as a mouthpiece, right? Using it as a platform for your larger political movement. But at least right now, if you start the campaign as a third party saying, hey, we're not even trying to win, we're just trying to talk, I feel like that's not going to do it for a lot of Americans. Americans are very, very election focused. Right? It's just the way things are here. It's a media spectacle. There's a lot of money in campaigning, all of that shit. People pay attention to it, and you got to go where people are paying attention. And if that means, again, doing the old bait and switch, I think we should. Zohran's program. Despite running as a Democrat, Zohran is generating buzz due to his campaign promises. He pledges to freeze rents on rent-stabilized apartments, make public buses free, and open a handful of city-owned grocery stores with lower prices. His left liberal supporters claim that now they're left liberal, not even socialists anymore, claim that implementing this program would improve workers' conditions and make socialism more popular. In one campaign video, Zohran says, New Yorkers are being crushed by rent and childcare. The slowest buses in the world are robbing us of our time and our sanity. Working people are being pushed out of the city they built. A mayor could change this, and that's why I'm running. We can afford to bring down the rent, have world-class public transit, and make it easier to raise a family. We can do all of that and so much more, because this is New York. We can afford to dream. So they say, while all of these aims are laudable and understandably popular, the reality is that no mayor can single-handedly end the cost of living crisis New Yorkers face. And this is where I get a little bit annoyed at the way some of these socialist organizations write, the way they speak, really, but a lot of it's written. No mayor can single-handedly end the cost of living crisis. He's not saying that. I guess it's a straw man argument. I just hate that. It's like, why are you arguing back against something I didn't say? Right? I don't think that's what he's saying. If he's a socialist, worth his salt at all, and I think he is, I think he knows what he's talking about. He understands that, but he's talking about doing what we can do now. And that's fine, because it's not the be all end all. RCA, and maybe it's like a Trotskyist thing. This is what I hear. I don't know. I have Trotsky's friends. I think that Trotsky wrote some good shit. I'm not too sectarian about socialism. But yeah, it's this very defeatist, like, no, you can't do any of that. The mayor can't single-handedly end the cost of living crisis. And it's like, no, man, but like you can get these things done if you know how to fucking fight and work the system. And then if you don't get all of it, which he likely will not, then there's your opportunity to use the office as a platform to say, hey, the reason we can't do all of this is the capitalist system. Look how XYZ people in politics and business have stood in our way. That can no longer stand. And that's why DSA is breaking away. And I'm told that the DSA is actually voting in August on whether to do this. We'll see. They've voted on it before and have never decided to break away, but we'll see what happens. I don't know why I'm wearing headphones. I'm not listening to the article. Under these conditions, any reforms that Zohran manages to deliver for one section of the working class will have to be paid for by taxing another section of our class. I don't think that's true, and that's why he's talking about taxing the rich more. And, I think RCA and a lot of socialists would argue it's not socialism to just tax the rich, which fine. No, you're just sort of like redirecting the flow of capital under capitalism. But it's still better. It's still better than the alternative. And when he talks about like free buses and free transit, that is removing a tax from the working class because you already pay for public transit through your taxes. The fare is just another revenue source that they're using instead of taxing the rich, taxing corporations, and this sort of thing. But I'll give them this. The next thing they say is this is clear in Zohran's support for congestion pricing, which taxes those who commute to Manhattan by car, ostensibly to fund improvements in public transit. So, sure, I get that, and I don't love it. So, okay. But yeah, if you're going to improve public transit, people won't need to commute by car as much. Far from making socialism more popular, reforms like these divide the working class against one another. Fine, fair, that happens. So now they say, does that mean a socialist mayor couldn't accomplish anything? Far from it. A workers' representative in City Hall could be the focus of a nationwide struggle against austerity. And yeah, I think that's great. There is historical precedent for such a fight. In the 1980s, our comrades controlled the city council in Liverpool, England, and used their position to launch a militant campaign against Margaret Thatcher's vicious attacks on the working class. Now, this bothers me because they don't go into that at all. They don't even link to another article that goes into more detail about that. Because they say there's historical precedent for it. And okay, great. What did that accomplish? Is Liverpool a socialist enclave now? Is England or the UK a Soviet socialist republic now? Did I miss this? What are you telling me? See, you can be in office and make a stink about austerity. Okay. And what happened? It is true that as a society, we can afford better housing, transit, and childcare. But this will not happen through dreaming. Now, again, this is a straw man and an unfair scrutiny on a stupid little platitude he threw in at the end of a substantive statement. A class independent candidate would run on a socialist program and make it clear that this program could only be implemented through the collective struggle of the working class to make the bosses and not the workers pay for the crisis. I agree. Now, here's the problem. Capitalism is the problem. I just read that. No, but here's the problem with what they're saying here. Again, I think the DSA's Trojan horse strategy would be best. But regardless, why hasn't RCA done this? They sit there and say, here's how to do it. You got to run on a socialist program and say that we can't do any of this unless we make the bosses pay and, flip the system and become a dictatorship of the proletariat. Great. Do it. I don't know. I don't know if they publish their numbers. I don't know if their numbers are public. But I think RCA is a pretty big organization. They're part of a big international. Why can't they try this? Try it on a local level. And this is something that people have told me, people don't pay attention to the local level. And they are too small to do stuff at the national level. Sorry, are you telling me that if a good handful of communists run for local offices as members of an international communist party, maybe some of them even win, you don't think that's going to make headlines in America? You don't think that's going to make people pay attention to the local? Who gives a fuck if we're small? The Republican Party was small as shit in 1850. The Bolsheviks were small. Come on, just do it. Let's give it a shot. Especially if we're not going to, at this point, unify some of these organizations so that we have greater numbers. We're not going to merge DSA and RCA and PSL and Sunrise Movement, whatever the fuck. Okay, then let DSA do it their way and you try it your way. I don't understand what's stopping you. Capitalism is the problem. For Zohran and DSA, the problem isn't with the capitalist system itself, but with individual politicians and their policy choices. I don't think that's true. I think that DSA is doing what they feel they can do now. And DSA doesn't only do electoral stuff. Like they are at the forefront of organizing workers and tenants and doing mutual aid stuff, and also doing a little bit of that, bringing different factions together. They have a Maoist faction. They have a Marxist-Leninist faction. They do this stuff. And you can tell me, oh, it doesn't matter and it doesn't accomplish this or that. Okay, but my point is just, again, let's be honest. Let's not fucking attack each other about, like, well, you don't even believe capitalism's a problem. All right, dude. No, they do, but they're doing what they think is the best way forward for that. Maybe they're totally wrong, but they do largely agree with us about capitalism. So why are you being this way? This attitude is reflected in his statements about Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo. Life in this city doesn't need to be this hard, but politicians like Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo want it to be this way. They care about their donors. They care about themselves. They don't care about you, the working class who keep this city running. This campaign is for everybody who believes in the dignity of their neighbors. But it's not simply a question of bad choices or lack of caring by individual politicians like Adams and Cuomo. It's not that. It's a little bit that. Because again, Zohran is a working class guy who is explicitly running what he believes is a working class campaign. And if we're going to break through some of these barriers, you need charismatic figures like Zohran Mamdani to do it. I don't want him to just bring people back to the Democratic Party. I hope he makes the coolest choice he could make. But yeah, I know I don't want to fall too much into like great man theory, but it matters who the leaders are. When Lenin was in charge, we still had the Soviets, still had the International, and under Stalin, some of that changed. And we can talk about like what was happening at that moment kind of necessitated this, but fine. But RCA is all about how Lenin and the first 4 years of the Russian Soviet Republic were like, that's the way. We were almost there. And then Stalin fucking ruined it. And it's like, okay, well, that sounds a little bit to me that like, well, Lenin made good choices and Stalin made bad choices, right? So again, let's not dumb this down too much. The root cause is a system that enriches the wealthy few at the expense of those who actually make society run. But that's what he said. That's literally in the statement. Okay, this part is bothering me a little bit. In full disclosure, I used to be a member of RCA when it was under a different name, but I swear I'm not just trying to like be salty and like, oh, I hate them now. Like, I really don't. But yeah, I agree with them in a lot of ways. And then in others, I see some issues. They care about their donors. They care about themselves. They don't care about you. So this is what RCA is calling, he's just saying that these guys are bad, but he's good. And that's how you fix society. Okay. What do you think? The root cause is a system that enriches the wealthy few at the expense of those who actually make society run. Oh, okay. The working class who keep this city running. They don't care about you. The working class who keep the city running. They care about their donors. Oh, who are the donors? They're the wealthy few. What? They're saying it. They're saying it right there. Despite his nice sounding words, Zohran is ultimately a reformist seeking to make minor tweaks to the New York City budget. Yeah, ultimately a reformist. I think it's maybe a little more than minor tweaks, but tweaks, right? Even if they're medium tweaks, they're tweaks. In the process, he is deceiving the working class about the role of the Democratic Party and about the possibility of achieving meaningful improvements under capitalism. So that's where I agree. I think that deceiving is a strong word. I don't think he's trying to deceive, but I do think that, yeah, when we run these types of campaigns, when you like the way that Bernie moved and the way that AOC moved and how the kind of like left faction of the Democratic Party formed over the last decade, that gave people kind of a false hope that, oh, we can get in there. We can kind of work this system and make things better that way by electing some great people. And I would hope that a lot of us have learned in that time that that didn't really work. Just didn't do what we wanted it to do. I think there's a problem there with Zohran Mamdani, not personally, just the type of campaign we have here. Because again, he is talking about fixing the Democratic Party, and I want him to break away. Rather than building the influence of socialism, he is tainting that word through false promises and associating himself with the rotten and discredited Democratic Party. A couple of things I do want to mention before getting to the end of this article. People can't organize, right? In these conditions, they're priced out of the city. They spend all their time working. They can't get anywhere on the bus, right? He's talking about these slow ass buses that you pay money for, and then you just fucking sit in traffic. You know, they become unhoused because they can't afford the rent. The people need some relief before they can worry about reaching a higher political consciousness and taking on the capitalist system. Like, you can't expect people to do that when they're this scattered by the realities of capitalism. We need to have people in the city where they're close to each other, where they take the bus together and they have jobs with other working class people, and they can think about this stuff and talk about this stuff and organize and hopefully create this wonderful theoretical socialist party that we all want. And then I just wanted to mention this study, the Tocqueville paradox. When does reform provoke rebellion? Okay, so there's this idea, there's kind of two branches to this area of thought. Social democracy is kind of these reforms that Zohran Mamdani is talking about, right? It's also stuff like universal health care and tuition-free college, all these things that Sweden has, and we're like, why can't we, a lot of Europe has some form of these things. 100 years ago, 120 years ago, 150 years ago, the socialists of that time in Europe, and I'm sure elsewhere, but especially Europe, believed that getting into power and making these reforms will kind of just spur on the revolution. It'll just sort of organically, from people thriving, the workers will take over or something like that. Because of what RCA is talking about in their article, the idea is, well, you give people a taste and they're going to be like, I like this fucking socialism shit. Let's do this. 100 years of this in Europe has shown that that doesn't really happen. And this is something that Marx kind of got wrong, it's not, Marx is not supposed to be like a prophet. He was just making observations based on where he lived in history. But Marx kind of thought that socialist revolution would first happen in the most developed capitalist countries, Western Europe, the US, Canada, like this is where he thought revolutions would happen, because it was this idea of stages. Like, you've got slavery, feudalism, capitalism, socialism. This is just, it makes sense. It's going to go that way. And it didn't. You might have noticed it didn't happen. Germany had a failed revolution, Spain, France, Italy, the US, a lot of uprisings that never quite materialized into full-on socialist revolution. And you could say that a lot of these social democratic compromises, even in the US with like FDR and the New Deal, quelled the revolutionary fervor. But this study, again, the Tocqueville paradox, when does reform provoke rebellion, talks about how there is this kind of balance you can reach between like revolutionary fervor and reforms, where you can get this like perfect storm of revolution. Because the phrase I first heard about this in is revolution follows periods of frustrated reform. And you could say that this happened in Russia, right? The Tsar implemented the Duma because it was like, okay, fine, you can have some democracy. And then he dissolved it and made a new one because there were too many liberals in the old one. Then there were still too many liberals. So he dissolved it and started a new one. It doesn't matter. But that was reform, right? That was people going like, oh, cool. Like, we get to vote. We get to participate as lowly fucking workers and peasants. Maybe this is progress. Maybe this is something, but it wasn't. It didn't really get them anywhere. They just realized that, okay, we don't really have political power. This is all just a fucking like, okay, here's a treat, fuck off. So that's what this study is talking about. So a little bit from their conclusion here, Tocqueville's conjecture was that citizens would be most likely to rebel precisely when reform promised to change their lives for the better. We provide a micro foundation for this claim, showing that reforms that are introduced centrally but implemented locally create the conditions for rebellion by driving a wedge between what citizens expect and what they receive. Create the conditions for rebellion by driving a wedge between what citizens expect and what they receive. Now, I'll grant to RCA, in order for this to work, Zohran's going to have to be on top of that messaging. And again, break away from the Democratic Party, but just be on top of this messaging and keep doing what he's been really good at doing so far, which is, hey, that's your enemy. That's what you got to do. You got to fucking point at it and say, that's what's stopping it. That's what's stopping you from having better. Because that's what the right does. That's what Trump does. But they're pointing at immigrants and they're pointing at trans people. But that's bullshit. What the problem is your boss. The problem is your landlord. The problem is fucking Andrew Cuomo. All right. That's what we've got to do. By setting a reference point against which local implementation falls short, reform creates grievances that may be only partially offset by reform's improvement over the status quo. It is the failure of officials to fully internalize these grievances that produces the Tocqueville paradox. At the same time, our analysis places bounds on the effect that Tocqueville describes. It is only when reform is complicated or state capacity is low that reform provokes rebellion. When central governments are able to push through implementation on their own, reform unambiguously reduces rebellion. I don't think there's any real risk of that. I don't think that it's going to go too well when Zohran's in office. I think that it's going to be complicated. All right. And we'll just pop back over to finish the RCA article. A genuine working class campaign, independent of both parties and putting forward a socialist program and class struggle methods, could win massive support and serve as an example for the whole country. It could channel the anger and discontent in society into building the Communist Party necessary to lead our class in a fight to the finish against the capitalists. That's what I'm talking about. I agree that we need an independent socialist workers' party, but I question whether RCA or anyone else has figured out the best way to do that in our current conditions. That's why I submit DSA, get the fuck out of the Democratic Party. And the final line, this is the type of campaign that the RCA will run in the future as our forces grow. Now, again, do it. They've been around for over 30 years. Do it. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed. And you can follow us over on patreon.com/radicalize-me if you want to become a member. You can also do a one-time donation at Buy Me a Coffee. It's all in the description. And I'll see you next time. Bye now.